Good evening.
Good evening.
As last time, we had our introduction to Revelations or End Times or Eschatology, and I told you then that we'd have some information sessions, and that's one of those, and I apologize to those that don't care anything about information. But anyway, tonight we're going to have a short history lesson about eschatology, where we could come from. Of course, in the early church, they didn't have printing presses or the internet, so there's not a lot of material available, but there is some. And I haven't read this material. I've read excerpts from it from commentaries and things, and so, but I believe that the commentaries were accurate in what they've stated and put in there. So I feel confident in this information. But we'll mention Justin Martyr. He was in the first part of the second century, and he wrote Dialogue with Trypo. And in that, he had a section on eschatology. And he describes himself as continuing in the Jewish belief of a temporary messianic kingdom prior to the eternal state. And he says that he believes that there will be two resurrections, one of believers and a reign of Jesus in Jerusalem for 1,000 years, and then a general resurrection. And he states that he believes in this because of prophecies in Isaiah. Now, I've gone back and checked again in Isaiah, and there's a lot of prophecies in Isaiah about the messianic New Jerusalem and new creation, the Gentiles coming in, but I've never found anything in Isaiah about 1,000-year reign in Jerusalem. So if you know where he got that from, let me know, but I haven't found that. But he says, I and others who are right-minded Christians on all points are assured that there will be a resurrection of the dead and 1,000 years in Jerusalem, because Isaiah spoke concerning this period of 1,000 years. And like I say, I haven't found it. But I will say that he also states that there are many who belong to the pure and pious faith and are true Christians who think otherwise. So I commend him for that statement. I think in our day and time, we have a tendency to think that anybody that disagrees with what we believe, they couldn't be a pure, true Christian, so we just write them off. But we can feel like we're right-minded and still accept other Christians who might see something a little different than us, and I think that's what Justin Martyr was saying there. But basically, he's a premillennialist because he believed that Isaiah said that there would be a reign of 1,000 years in Jerusalem, and then the final judgment and the resurrection of the dead. The believers had already been resurrected at this time, according to him. And then we have Irenaeus, who was in the second half of the first century. He was the bishop of Lyon, and he wrote volumes called Against Heresies. And in his fifth book, Against Heresies, he focuses on eschatology. And in that, he maintains basically the same thing that Justin Martyr did, that there would be a resurrection, two resurrections, and there would be a 1,000-year reign in Jerusalem. But he doesn't use Isaiah as his standing point. He says because it was promised to Abraham, and Abraham never got it in his lifetime. And so he believed that once Christ returns and sets up his kingdom, that Abraham will come with him and he'll have his 1,000 years reign in Jerusalem. And he also believed that human history would be for a total of 6,000 years, and then the 1,000 years would be the Sabbath. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the creationist theories, but I believe that most of us would see that modern day science would tell us that human history is more than 6,000 years old. I'll let you research that if you want to. But anyway, the early Christian church seemed to be basically premillennialists. They believed that Christ would come, and he would set up a reign in Jerusalem for 1,000 years, and then there would be the final judgment of the general resurrection of the dead. And this continued to be the case until Augustine came along. Augustine became a Christian in 386, and by the time he died, he was the leading theologian of the church, and he states that the kingdom maintained its eschatological term, but he didn't believe that it was a futuristic kingdom. He basically says that the church, by the diffusion of its faith and works, would spread this kingdom of faith throughout the world. And so, in other words, the millennial is not a literal 1,000 years. It's until Christ returns. And so this amillennialist became the position of the church and Christians for up until about the time of the Reformation. Now, when the Reformation came along, the more well-known Reformation people maintained this amillennialist view. The Lutherans and the Augsburg Confession condemned the Anabaptists and others who scattered the Jewish opinion that there would be before the resurrection of the dead, that the kingdom would be set up in Jerusalem, and he called and Calvin called that a Jewish fable. So the Lutherans and the Calvinists and the Anglican Church rejected that, but as can be seen by that Augsburg Confession there, the Anabaptists and probably the Huguenots and Bohemian Brothers believe more in a premillennialist idea, and because we Baptists have come more from Anabaptist roots than we have Lutheran and Calvinist and Anglican roots, there's a strong premillennialist viewpoint that's come through Baptist life. And when we come to America, we see that the early Americans were also premillennialist. Jonathan Edwards, he believed that 1,260 years after the Romans became the recognized universal authority, that the kingdom would come and they'd set it up there in Jerusalem. How he arrived at that, I haven't found that information, but so he lived in 1703 to 1758, and so he's basically saying until 1866, and that date has already passed. So his beliefs about the time kind of went by the wayside there. But other early American Baptists or Christians, Increase Mather and Cotton Mather, who were well known, also proclaimed this premillennialist view that there would be a resurrection, but they differed from what we know as the current premillennialist view, which is dispensational in view. This was brought about in the 1830s. John Nelson Darby, who he was an Anglican churchman at first. He'd gone to Westminster School and Trinity College in Dublin to become a lawyer, and he later said that he decided not to become a lawyer and became ordained as an Anglican priest because he didn't want to sell his talents to defeat justice. But shortly after he had been ordained as a Anglican clergyman, he left the Anglican Church because the Archbishop of Dublin declared that anyone that came into the Anglican Church had to swear allegiance to George IV. And Ireland, of course, weren't particularly fond of George IV as the rightful king, and so he resigned. And shortly after that, he fell from a horse and was badly injured and was laid up for a good while. And during this time, he began to develop certain ideas and thinking, and one of these was the fact that he believed that an ordained clergy was a sinful thing. Now, I understand the times, and this was a radical idea, and it probably needed some emphasis there that the Holy Spirit could work through all people. We believe in the priesthood of the believer, but I wouldn't go so far to call the ordained people as sinful. But it was a different time, and we understand that when we are ordaining someone, we're not necessarily installing them with certain powers. We're believing that we're recognizing the call of God on a person's life, and that's why we're ordaining this person, that we recognize that God is calling them, and so that's why we're ordaining them. But it was a different time then, and so this idea made him very popular, and he began preaching this around in various assemblies there in Ireland, and the Plymouth Brethren came into being there, and over the next 5 years, he developed certain ideas about eschatology, which we've come to know as dispensationalism. He believed, which was a new statement, that there would be a 7-year tribulation that would come on the world, but just before that tribulation, the church would be raptured out of the world. So the church would no longer be in the world, and so it would turn back to the Jews, who would, because of the rapture of the church out of the world, would suddenly turn to Christ, and they would become the evangelists of the world during this period of tribulation. And so that received a lot of talk, and he became more or less the father of dispensationalism because of these views. And the next person that furthered this idea, especially in America, was Cyrus Scofield. We know the Scofield Reference Bible. Well, Scofield was also going to become a lawyer, and while he was about to become a lawyer, he says that a lawyer acquaintance shared the gospel with him, and he became a Christian. So we know that in 1879, he was leading the St. Louis evangelistic campaign for Dwight L. Moody and heading up the St. Louis YMCA. And he had become associated with the Walnut Street Presbyterian Church. James A. Brooks was the pastor there, and he had taken up these ideas that Darby had prompted there in England, and so Scofield learned these premillennialist ideas during that period of time. In 1883, he left St. Louis and filed for divorce from his wife, and left her in St. Louis, and took over a Congregationalist church in Dallas. It had 5 members at the time, and he was there for 12 years, and it became little more than 500 members during the time he was there. And he also, while he was there, he wrote a pamphlet, Rightly Dividing the Word of Truth, and many have credited this pamphlet as kind of the foundation of modern fundamentalists. But he was preaching these ideas that he had learned there in St. Louis from James Brooks, that Brooks had learned from Darby. And so Scofield left Dallas and went to Moody's Church and became the pastor there at Trinity Congregationalist Church in East Northfield, Massachusetts. And he was there for a while, but while he was there, he also tried to take over Moody's Northfield Bible Training School, and that kind of failed. He didn't get to take over the school, and so he left there, supposedly to go back to Dallas. But there's no indication that he ever really went back to Dallas to become the pastor there. And he later says that he left the Congregationalist Church because it had become too liberal, and he didn't want to be a part of it, and he had become a Southern Presbyterian. Well, the Southern Presbyterian, what we do know is that he went to New York City, and he started a correspondence course for lay people. And in the process, he laid out his views about eschatology, and so this course became the foundation for his Scofield Reference Bible, and it was a good thing in a certain way, because it was the first Bible that was laid out since 1560 that had the commentary within the Scripture itself, which had good points and bad points about that, but also it had the chain linked, where you could link one verse that had a theme from some other chapter or some other book in the Bible. And so it was a good thing, but it was also a bad, because people more or less took his commentary and made it to be part of the Bible because it was in the Bible. And so he laid out these ideas of premillennialist there in his reference Bible. And then in his later editions of this reference Bible in 1917, he put in, he tried to date all the events of the Bible, and that's where most of us Americans became aware of Archbishop James Ussher's calculation that the date of creation was 4004 BC, and but millions of copies of this reference Bible were sold, and so it became a major influence for premillennialist dispensationalists here in this country. And in recent years, we talked about last time that Hal Lindsey's late great planet Earth in the late 70s carried on this idea, and then in recent years, Tim LaHaye and Jenkins' Left Behind series has continued to push this idea, and people. So it's out there, as especially I think in many places. The predominant idea that's out there, and I sent out some little graphs and charts, diagrams, and we'll go over these before we. And if you didn't get one, they're over there on the table. I made one copy for each thing, and Elias made some that had two sides and two on each side. But the first one here we have is post-tribulation premillennialism. Now, this is what we were talking about with the early church. They believed that we were after the crucifixion. You see the cross there. There would be a church history time that the church would be in tribulation. And then there would be a second coming. And then this 1,000-year reign of Jesus on the earth would be set up in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. And at the end of this, there would be the last judgment. And then pre-tribulation dispensational premillennialism is the next one. It's basically the same thing. The church history is going on here. We're in the dispensation of church history. And then there would be a second coming of Christ. He would not come to stay, though. He would just come to take the church out of the world. He would rapture the church, and then there would be the 7 years of tribulation. And then he would come basically a third time with the church to set up his reign in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. And at the end of that 1,000 years, there would be the last judgment. And then postmillennialism, we have this period of church history, and because, and I think that there's not a lot of postmillennialists around anymore, but at one point, the church felt like that they were going to be so successful in spreading the gospel in the world that sooner or later that the millennium will start, the church would be in charge of the world, and they would set up this 1,000-year reign here on the earth. And at the end of that period of 1,000 years, Jesus would come the second time for the last judgment. And then there's amillennialism, which I said before. Augustine believed that the kingdom of God started at the time Christ came. When he left, the kingdom was here. It's going to be here until he comes again. That the millennial 1,000 years is not a literal 1,000 years. It's a symbolic 1,000 years. As we stated last time, numbers don't mean what our math numbers mean. And so when it says 1,000, it's not really a literal 1,000 years. And so this is the viewpoint of amillennialist, that we're in the millennium. The church is free to spread the gospel, to take the gospel wherever, and at the end of this period of time, whenever Christ comes again, that he will come and the dead will rise and there will be a last judgment. So that's what we'll be talking about in coming weeks. Are there any general questions about these charts so that we understand what we're talking about when we use these terms going forward?
What do Southern Baptists prominently teach nowadays?
Well, I think that you will find that the majority of Southern Baptists are probably premillennial dispensationalists. That's what I was kind of hinting at when I said that Baptists came from more of the Anabaptist traditions, and that's what they adopted during the Reformation. They went back to what the early church thought that I talked about with Justin Martyr and Uranus. There in the second century, they believe, and so I think that's why you will find that most Baptists are in support of Israel, because they believe that the kingdom has to be set up in Jerusalem at some point and reign for 1,000 years. But as Justin Martyr also said, there are many who do not believe that, and they are pure and faithful Christians. And so, and I'm one of those. I'm a nominalist.
And Ray Summers at Baylor University was one of them. All millennial people.
Yes, Ray Summers and Herschel Hobbs, who was kind of the denominational theologian there for a while, helped with the original Baptist Faith and Message was on. And so there are many who do not, and we'll talk about this as we go along, but I think the majority of most Christians in America, just because of the influence of that's been there, like I said, from the Scofield Reference Bible, and then the late great Planet Earth, and the Left Behind series, and all these things have just.
I think Hal Lindsey was expecting the Lord to come in 1986, so he missed it by a year.
Yeah. That's kind of what happens when you adopt these views, but anyway, I would say that's where the majority are at, but not everyone by any means. Any other questions about the charts? Okay. We will just hold on to those, and we'll refer to those, or when we mention these terms in later discussions, you'll know what we're talking about, what we're talking about as we go forward. But